New music means new project. This fall, the National Building Museum is bringing together leading Black voices in design, art, and architecture for Intersections, a series of dynamic discussions about culture, equity, and representation through the lens of design. Launching September 16th and running through December 14th, Intersections engages nationally recognized Black architects, designers, and artists in conversations focused on social justice in the built environment. Through interactive lectures and hands-on workshops, the series is designed to provoke new thinking, spark conversation, enlighten, and empower. In partnership with the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C., Architecture's Political Podcast will dive deeper into some of the topics as well as presenters stemming from this phenomenal series, Intersections. In case you're not from the area, let me tell you a little bit about the National Building Museum. Since it was created in 1980 through an act of Congress, the National Building Museum has transformed the public's understanding of the impact of architecture, engineering, landscape architecture, construction, planning, and design. Through exhibitions, educational programs, and special events, the National Building Museum welcomes visitors of all ages to experience stories about the built world and its power to shape lives, communities, and our future. Links to the Intersection series is in the show notes of each episode, which includes registration that's both in person and virtual. So check it out. Who knew that I would be talking to Architects Magazine's game changer, Vanessa Morrison, co-founder and CEO of Open Design Collective, which is a nonprofit organization that supports the social and spatial needs of marginalized communities. She's also co-founder of BLACKSPACE Oklahoma. We're talking because of the National Building Museum's Intersection series. And BLACKSPACE, the national organization, has put together 3 workshops, one of which is in person that's coming up at the time of this episode being aired, and they've done 2 virtual workshops, and the second virtual workshop I should say is what Vanessa participated in. Vanessa was pretty much a cold contact. I reached out to BLACKSPACE as part of the National Building Museum workshop, so I never know who I'm going to get, who is this person, and if we vibe or not. And we so vibed, as you can hear in this conversation. I've learned so much from Vanessa. And the fact that she didn't grow up with the traditional, I was playing with Legos and I wanted to be an architect, or I saw the city, I wanted to be an urban planner. She had no idea about city planning. She actually got her undergrad degree under Human Relations and Women's and Gender Studies, which should be a prerequisite for all of us in this AEC industry. Vanessa didn't start off knowing about architecture or city planning for that matter. She came with a unique perspective from her domestic violence shelter job during and even a little bit after college. We do touch upon domestic violence in this episode, so trigger warning to you all. We also discussed cultural erasure, as well as the whole reason why I'm talking to her is to highlight the workshop, and the workshop that she participated in is, along with her cohort, focused on museum design. And her being from Oklahoma generationally, I think she said 4th generation Oklahoman. No, Oklahoman? My apologies. Oklahomies? I like Oklahomies, but I know that's not it. Let me just look this up real quick. Oklahoman. You call them Oklahoman. I kind of like Oklahomies because you're a homie. I kind of like that. I'm not here to change anybody else's culture, so it's Oklahoman. But I learned a lot. I hope you learn a lot too. I'm keeping this brief, so here you go.
Hey.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Great. Oh, it's so good to see you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so good to see you.
Right. Thank you so much for having me.
This is for your listeners out there. She is wearing the BLACKSPACE Oklahoma t-shirt.
Trying to make sure I'm in frame.
BLACKSPACE recently celebrated their 7-year anniversary, and you guys did an Instagram live for that, which you were on. And
Yeah.
I watched, not
Oh,
live,
you were
but
there.
I
Yes.
was watching it. Yeah, I had to because you guys are doing your thing, 7 years. And the Oklahoma chapter is 5 years old.
About to be. So around 2018 is when we got our group started down here. So going on 5 years or 4 years. Wait, 2018, two. Yeah, 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Going on five.
Wow. The whole reason why BLACKSPACE is on here is because they recently did a workshop as part of the intersections where diversity meets equity with the National Building Museum. So we are here to talk about that. But before we get into that, Vanessa has a fascinating backstory that I want to get into. So you guys, the audience, can hear it too. You got your degree in social work, correct?
Well, actually, yeah, human relations and women's and gender studies was my undergraduate degree. It's very social services related, but not quite social work, which is an actual degree field that has a licensure and things of that nature, but did very similar work in supporting people just facing adversity in my community. So I started that work before I got my undergraduate degree, went and got my degree in human relations and women's and gender studies, and kind of saw myself going into a licensed therapist type of route. But after working in different positions, I kind of figured, that might not be for me full time. Like I enjoyed that work and supporting folks, but I didn't see myself probably having longevity in a field like that because I take things home with me. I'm not one of those people that can just go and hear someone's experience and story and just kind of clock out and be done with that. And so, yeah, I kind of just rerouted and found city planning through working with people and just understanding that, hey, there's things going on outside of the home too that make it really difficult for certain folks to thrive in their neighborhoods, and sort of started Googling what can I do to make the neighborhood better, the city better, and easier for folks to live in. And so I found city planning kind of that way. So very untraditional route, but really enjoyed the work and bringing in that perspective of working with people who have gone through a lot of challenges.
At what point in your life you started noticing things? You were a kid walking around the neighborhood, you noticed it, or as a teenager, or even through school? Because there are people who don't see these things. There are
Mm-hmm.
Black women who don't see these things. What was your aha moment?
Such a great question. Yeah. So I started in the social services public health field. I really was specifically focusing within a field of domestic violence. And so my background has been primarily working with domestic violence agencies and working with women, children, men, families who were fleeing violent situations and working to rebuild their lives and be safer. And so my first sort of real job in that field was a support staff in a 24-hour domestic violence shelter. I was in my early 20s. And when I think back in that era of time, I'm just like, who left me in charge of that? Like early 20s, I barely knew what I was doing. But the way the shelter was staffed or the shifts were scheduled is that there would be like the primary team and the leadership there during the day. But then after from 4 p.m. to midnight, and then midnight until 8 o'clock in the morning, you were by yourself working in that shelter, supervising it. People would be needing to come in all hours of the night. You're doing intakes, you're helping support people, you're a crisis response professional. And so I worked that 4 to 12, and then even sometimes 12 to 8 a.m. shift, being, younger and also going to school at the time. It gave me flexibility to be able to work like that and then go to class the next day, doing that work. And again, just hearing these stories of women who were going through so much. It was primarily women. We do acknowledge that men also go through violence, but predominantly women are victimized, and they usually were the primary client coming in, so women and their children. And so I would be sitting there, listening to not only, again, the violence and the trauma and the challenges they were going through with their intimate partner, with the family member, but also how difficult it was for them to even leave that situation and why they had to come to a shelter, because it wasn't easy to find an affordable place to live. They didn't have a car to be able to get around and get to where they need to go. They didn't live in a safe neighborhood. I mean, there was just so many, I feel like, neighborhood, city scale issues that they were dealing with that made it even difficult for them to leave that situation. And then once they would go through our programs, and the shelter was a temporary stay, it wasn't a long-term stay. Generally, on average, people had a month to get their lives together, which I felt, I had a lot of challenges with that. How are you supposed to rebuild your life in 30 days and then go out there and figure it out? And so after women would leave our program, they would be out there struggling, trying to rebuild their lives. And because of that, a lot of times they would go back into that abusive situation. So it was just this cycle of returning back to the abusive situation, having to go through us. We're helping them with the little resources we have, and then it's back to square one. And after seeing that pattern for so long, I recognized the value in what we were doing and even being a temporary respite for people who were in those violent situations. But still, I'm like, this is not working. And why, again, are people struggling to be able to rebuild their lives and live in a neighborhood or a community where they can be okay and raise their children and be safe and stabilized? And so that's when I really started thinking about, who's making decisions about how our communities are shaped, planned, designed, who's resourcing them, who's making the call on how a school is resourced, or, the job opportunities in the area, or how people have access to public transit. I really started thinking about things on a neighborhood broader scale that I had never thought of before working with these women and seeing all the challenges they were going through. And so I got on Google, I started researching. I found this thing called city planning, had never heard of it before, never met a city planner, didn't know what a city planner did, and certainly didn't see any representation of my community in those positions. And so I was like, man, but this sounds like something I need to do. It's just this profession that's working to plan and resource communities and thinking about the future and how people are going to be able to thrive and be okay and support themselves. And I was like, okay, this sounds like something for me. And so I was super intimidated. I saw that it was in the University of Oklahoma. It's in the College of Architecture. And so even that word architecture was super intimidating for me. I'm like, I am not a design architecture type of person. What does this mean? But some of the professors let me shadow classes, and I really just fell in love with the program. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I don't know how, but I'm going to. So I was working full time at that domestic violence agency and going to school full time, and graduated in 2015 and have been doing projects ever since. So really, if it wasn't for working with the community members who were going through so much and taught me so much, I probably would have never thought about city planning. I really thank all those families and women and those opportunities I had working in community, because that really is what led me into this profession.
I want to go back to one of the papers that you wrote. It's called Black Women's Perspective on Neighborhood Safety, Reflections of Women in Northeast Oklahoma City, Photo Voice.
Yes.
And for what's a photo voice?
Photo voice is actually a methodology typically used in social work or by researchers and even city planning professionals. And it's a really cool, low barrier engagement method where you give a participant a camera and you give them a couple of prompts to answer questions to. So something as simple as, and in this project, we ask Black women, what is something life-giving about your neighborhood? And then what's something challenging about your neighborhood? And they walk you around and take photography of their different experiences and are able to tell you stories through pictures, which is really a more in-depth understanding. It gives you a more in-depth understanding of what their lived experience is like versus just doing like a basic interview or a town hall. So it's a really powerful tool that gives participants the power to show you through photography what their lived experiences are and what's today and then in their life in their shoes.
They literally will take a picture and then they do a voice recording over that picture describing that day or the situation or like whatever.
Yeah, so in that project, we did the photography. So we gave women cameras, and then we also audio recorded sort of what they were responding to. And then we curated an exhibit of the photography so people could walk around. We actually had a whole event where we invited city leadership, institutional, professional, stakeholders, et cetera, to come out and learn about what are Black women's experiences like in Northeast OKC. And it was really eye-opening because, again, the photography really is a powerful visualization tool that helps people understand a concept at a deeper level versus sometimes just explaining that through words.
Mm.
We had audio recordings where we transcribed pieces of their story and put them along with the photography in the exhibit so people could see and learn more about their stories. And so that project was actually in response to a very horrible situation that happened in Northeast Oklahoma City. There was a former Oklahoma City police officer who used his power and privilege to abuse Black women in that neighborhood. He specifically patrolled that area. It would pull over Black women who were either driving or walking, and he would run their names. And if they had a background or a criminal history, he sexually assaulted them.
Oh
And
no.
he got away with that with multiple women until somebody reported it. And then the Oklahoma City Police Department actually launched an internal investigation and found other women who also were victimized while he was policing that area. And so, such a tragedy in so many different ways. But as a built environment professional, we in the group of people that I was working with on the project, we were like, okay, we need to understand how the built environment played a role in his ability to do that, because he
Mm.
wasn't in people's homes and hiding behind, houses necessarily. He was out in public space, in the public realm, doing these crimes in his car or in these forgotten areas of the city. And Northeast Oklahoma City is our historically Black community that has suffered from a lot of disinvestment over the years. So there's a lot of urban decay and forgotten areas and dark spaces in the community that allows this type of criminal activity to happen versus other parts of the city that are well invested, well resourced, well lit at night, and et cetera. And so we wanted to understand, how did the urban fabric of the community create this hunting ground for him, and how can we bring visibility to that, to city officials and more, to understand and better pay attention to how they can address some of these spatial issues in the community. So it was very powerful. Those women were so brave. A lot of the women were connected to the survivors of this officer, and so it really mobilized these women in a way where they could advocate, speak to their experiences, again, bring visibility to Black women's safety in the community, and gave them a platform to really talk to those stories. And so it was a powerful project.
I want to read this quote that I got out of your abstract. The discourse within the project led the co-researchers towards political and economic solutions and an understanding that positive change will occur only when they, Black women, gain control of the tools of urban development and the participatory process that creates urban policy. That's a
Mm-hmm.
lot. So can you can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. I think something that we've been grappling with here as built environment professionals, and I think nationally as well, is really understanding how we in our professions have caused a lot of harm to communities from a policy perspective and in practice, and how we have done, again, a lot of harm and have been a part of the problem, not a part of the solution. And so we, as I know, so many other people around the country are trying to figure out ways where we can address those harms and really position the experts, the true experts, people who live and work and raise their children in these communities every day, to have more of a leadership role within our work. And so being able to provide a platform for those women, again, to bring visibility to those experiences, was really a catalyst for some immediate changes that were happening, that began happening in that area because of the work that they did. For one, there was a big issue and continues to be a big issue in Northeast Oklahoma City of these vacant buildings. Like, there's a lot of absentee property owners who own homes or other commercial buildings in the area and are not upkeeping them, and they are falling apart. They are attracting criminal activity, and they are also a health hazard. And a lot of these women live right next to buildings like this. And so through that exhibit, the city was alerted about some of these properties that they didn't even know about, and started issuing tickets and fines and calling people and being able to say, hey, you have a property in this community that's causing issues. We need you to come address it. Whereas before, no one would have ever even known those issues were existing. And so when we position people who have the lived expertise and experience to be a part of leading the work of resourcing, planning, designing communities, we're doing it right. And I think from a policy perspective, making sure that those voices and experiences are included in that work is really important.
So you graduated.
Yes.
And what was your first job?
I actually, when I graduated, I was still in the domestic violence world arena. I worked at a place that's actually it's a national model, international model now, I believe, and it's called the Family Justice Center. A lot of cities have a family justice center. I know when I was there was like over 70 or so across the country, and there's more and more popping up. And it basically creates a one-stop shop for victims of violence to be able to go to one facility and get wraparound resources versus having to go to all these different areas for resources and support. And so I was actually a director at that organization when I graduated, and I didn't really know where I was going to go. I knew that I wanted to do something very justice oriented, grassroots. I wanted to be in the community. And so looking at working with the city just wasn't something I felt like would fulfill me in those ways. Not saying the city isn't doing important work, but I'm not the institutional type. I like to, again, be out and about and doing things in a very community justice driven way. And I just didn't see a lot of opportunities for me to be able to do that, or job opportunities to be able to do that. So I kind of just was like, okay, I guess I'm going to start my own thing because I don't really see where I'd want to work and what I'd want to do. And so not long after that is when I actually found out about BLACKSPACE. I went to a conference called Black in Design in 2017. And me and a colleague of mine were kind of down here trying to figure out, okay, like we want to do this justice oriented work. We want to be a connector for more Black people to come into these professions. A lot of Black folks don't, I think it's becoming more mainstream, like what we do. Even just 5 years ago, a lot of people didn't even know what an architect actually did or what a city planner does. And so we were like, man, how do we use our representation and our relationships to get more people interested in this field and maybe in the profession? And so we were already kind of having these conversations and thinking about how do we start something. And then we went to Black in Design in 2017, which is a conference that's held there every other year that brings together Black urbanists to just learn best practices, cool work that other folks are doing, and to connect as very underrepresented professionals in the community. And so I went out there and just had a life-changing experience and a wonderful time. And then I saw BLACKSPACE presenting, and they were just talking about how they've just created this network of Black urbanists who are coming together to support one another and challenge each other in this field, and to reimagine how we address our work as professionals, designing, building, and planning for communities. I was like, okay, this is like the very thing that I've been looking to do and be a part of. And so I got back home and I emailed the founders, two of the founders, Emma and Osore, and then Kenyatta McLean. And I was like, hey, you guys do not know me, but I want to join what you're doing. I love what you're doing. Can I be your friend? And can I join your club? Like, I was just totally fangirling over them. And they were like, yeah, like, come on. I'm like, what? Like, was not expecting it to be that easy. I thought I was gonna have
No
to,
resume, no interview,
no,
no
no.
nothing.
They were just like, yeah, here's your logo. And let's meet every now and then and make sure you're supported. And like the rest was history. So we started BLACKSPACE Oklahoma in 2018 officially. And yeah, I have been able to do some amazing projects. And I really am so grateful for the network of BLACKSPACE because, again, we are super underrepresented in this field. And especially here in Oklahoma in the South, we are even, I feel like, even more underrepresented. I always share the statistic that last time I checked, there's only 5 Black licensed architects in the state of Oklahoma. Only one is a woman. I don't know any other Black women city planners. So it's just, we're very underrepresented here, and it shouldn't be that way. And so having this community, even though they're not here in Oklahoma, just knowing I can call my friends, my cousins in Atlanta or Chicago, or being able to come to meetings and just like break bread with all of these wonderful, brilliant people who inspire me and give me cool ideas I can look at doing here. It's just been amazing to have. And I'm so grateful for them, for that family that's been cultivated on a national level. I'm really grateful.
Side note about your chapter. You form a chapter, then what? You create bylaws. How did it work? I'm curious.
It was, yeah, that's going to be hard for me to explain. I feel like, because we just were rolling with everything that happened. I mean, and even with BLACKSPACE New York City, they were also really in the beginning stages of formalizing. And so there wasn't like a process that we followed necessarily. Now there is. Now there's policies and process and procedures and all of that. But when we were getting started, there was really none of that. And so it was just kind of like, y'all do cool Black urbanist stuff and tell us about it and let us know how we can support you. And so we really didn't have a linear process at all. We actually got our nonprofit status. I don't think any of the other cousins have done that. And I know BLACKSPACE New York City is also, they have their nonprofit status as well. And they really want the cousins to kind of be like organically just having fun and having shared learning experiences and creating urbanist experiences. So the nonprofit status is not necessary to do that. But we were in the very beginning, we were just like, we're going to go do this thing. And so we did that. And then we just started doing projects and going after small grants to be able to fund that type of work. Our first sort of premier project was the Northeast OKC Storytelling Project. And it was really in response to a growing concern that is in the community with losing the cultural identity as elders are passing away, people are moving in and out, change is coming. So over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of investment, a lot of different people moving into the community, a lot of change happening. And there's a fear that if something's not done to really preserve, protect, memorialize the stories and identities of this community, that could be lost forever. And so we created this project to create a space for people to come and digitally share their stories and learn how to do storytelling. What does that entail? We had lectures and guest speakers come out and teach the community on the different elements of the art of storytelling. And then we captured stories through recordings, video, and again, that digital piece, so we can protect them and they live somewhere forever. And what's really cool about that project is that we were able to create a mapping tool and geotag where those stories live. And so now there's a map of Northeast OKC that has taken these stories. Now you can go learn different, interesting, intangible, magical things about the community that otherwise you wouldn't know about, and know what area of the community it's connected to because of that mapping tool. And also, and really, again, is like gave a platform for elders to share their stories and for us to protect them, and we can keep them living somewhere forever. So that was like our breakout project. And Emma actually flew down and presented at it. And again, just having like that national support was so awesome to do and to have at that beginning, for the beginning until even today. So yeah, to start doing projects.
Oh wow, I love to do that and get paid for it and make a living off of it too. Like
Right.
this is amazing.
Emma and Kiana have the coolest jobs in the world.
They do.
I want I just want to, that's like a dream, I think, for all of us, like full time working for this super meaningful agency organization that's supporting so many people. I mean, that's like the dream. That's the dream.
Black women. Like it's like,
Yes.
Black women.
Right.
That's all I have to say.
Black women built that. They
Ex-
did that.
That's
Yes.
on the back of your t-shirt right now.
Right, right. It needs to be. We
It
need
needs to
Black
be.
women did that. Yes.
Right. Right. I think one thing that attracted me to BLACKSPACE was their manifesto.
Yes.
And they produced the video of it. And I was just like, this is exactly what I needed decades ago when I was struggling in architecture. I was struggling working in
Right.
architecture, this profession of ours. Like I really needed that. Something I want to touch upon too, when you were mentioning your first project, was cultural erasure. Like how it's like I always felt like history is repeating itself.
Mhm.
that when Black people congregate in the area for too long, like the man comes in and is like, wait a minute,
What's
they're
going on?
forming community here. Let's
Right.
just disrupt this a little bit, move people out, and just knock everything down and start all over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just
That's definitely something that has been felt here, I know nationally and locally for so long. And, the era of urban renewal is still felt in this community every single day. There were three, and I'm saying this community because I live in Northeast OKC. I walk around, I see it every single day, this erasure, vacancy, and disinvestment, and how it's really caused this generational trauma almost in law, and not almost, it has. And the loss of identity when you before could walk outside your door and be affirmed every day by your built environment and see representation of yourself in the businesses, in your neighbors, in the streets, in your community, and to go from this thriving dense Black community to not really seeing any trace of that at all is harmful, and it's not okay. And there's a lot of people who are working to address that. But cultural erasure has, there were again three urban renewal plans that impacted this area through the 60s and the 80s and laid the groundwork for the highway I-235 to be built right in the middle of the Black neighborhood. And so the neighborhood that I'm in is called the Deep Deuce neighborhood, and it's a historically Black neighborhood that was actually iconically known for jazz and creative arts, and people from all over the country, Ella Fitzgerald and more, actually frequented this area and performed right literally 2 blocks from me. There were clubs, lounges, facilities, venues that just hosted this Black creative cultural happenings every single day. And then you look around now, and again, you see no commemoration of that history. There's a couple of plaques on the sidewalk, and that's about it. So we're battling with that. We're trying to address those issues. There's a lot of leaders here locally who are working to just explore how we can revive that history. And maybe it won't ever look like it did once before, but how do we revive it, protect it, celebrate it, and think about how we can honor that history as we look towards future development in these neighborhoods. So yeah, cultural erasure.
it's a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
The workshop that you participated in. Can you just give a brief description of the workshop and like how it went?
Yeah, I actually facilitated with a couple of our other BLACKSPACE members. It was really interesting because Julia is West Coast, Kyra is East Coast, and I'm Central. So coordinating the practice runs and all that was a lot, but we did a great job. And the three of us co-facilitated this workshop for the museum and their network, and they actually opened it up for their community, which was really cool. What we did was a BLACKSPACE salon. And so that format of a workshop is to really get people just familiar with the manifesto tool, and just having a really open dialogue about what is BLACKSPACE, what does that mean to you, and how in your work can you be intentional about creating those spaces and supporting them in your neighborhood. And so we sort of kicked off the session talking about BLACKSPACE and this wonderful network that we all get to be a part of. And we actually spent time going through the manifesto tool. And I think what's so powerful in these workshops is that we actually have people read the different principles. So we don't just kind of skim and say, yeah, check this out later. We say, no, let's speak these out loud, experience them together, and kind of debrief, what does this mean and how does this translate into our work? And so talk about the manifesto. We have each person read a principle and just kind of sit with that and experience that together. And then we did a really fun, engaging conversation. So we did breakout rooms, and we used the Miro platform to have an interactive discussion on, again, what is BLACKSPACE? What is your connection? What's a BLACKSPACE that maybe you've been a part of building and supporting? And again, how does this look like in your work? And so it was really fun, especially speaking with folks who I think were really, ready for the conversation. They recognize how there's been a lot of erasure and invisibility in that museum space as it relates to Black culture. And how that work manifests in their institution. And so it was really interesting for me as a non-art person to hear about how they want to address those needs, and really again think about more intentionally, how do they, from not only within their institution but also as just a daily practice, how can they be more intentional about supporting and being inclusive of Black spaces. So it really, I love our format because it's very conversational. It's not lecture based. We're not just talking and people are listening. We're having a discussion where we are learning from each other. And I think that really creates an environment where people feel comfortable participating versus just kind of again this like lecture and then Q&A after an hour of talking. So it was really fun, and I think there's going to be another one in person actually coming up on a part 2. So it was fun to do the virtual piece and get them warmed up.
So the topic was museums, correct?
Yes.
So I just Googled BLACKSPACE manifesto and it came up. I'm just going to read a couple of them. And if any of them that popped in your mind during the workshop, like a conversation ensued, and it was just in your feedback on that. So there's that. Move at the speed of trust. I think that's an important one. Well, all of them are important. Choose critical connections over critical mass. Be humble learners who practice deep listening. Celebrate, catalyze, and amplify Black joy. Plan with, design with. Centered lived experience. Seek people at the margins. Reckon with the past to build the future. I think that's really that, and I just want to talk about that briefly. I've noticed, at least in the architecture world, when we do projects, we don't have the time to get into the history of the neighborhood. What we do is we rely on the client to provide us that history, if any, and then it's usually whatever the client wants. So I want a 3-unit, 10-unit, 250 unit, or commercial space or whatever. And the neighborhood could be disenfranchised. They got the property cheap and they just want to build whatever it is they feel like building. And so the architect doesn't have the time to really research the community and pull them into the project. But when you're in school, you have all the time in the world to do that all day, every day. And they actually encourage you to do that, to enrich the project. But the reality is common architecture firms don't have the time to do that. And there's more sole practitioners out there than medium to large size firms. So I thought that was an important one. Protect and strengthen culture, cultivate wealth, promote excellence, foster personal and communal evolution, and then manifest the future. Any of those, do you remember at the workshop that was just...
Yeah, so many. Yes, I definitely know in my breakout session, there was a lot of conversation about reckoning with the past to build the future. And it was interesting because the audience was very diverse, and there was Black folks and there was other people as well. And in my group, there was actually more Black folks than not, but there was one person who was not a person of color. And I remember there was just this moment where he was like, it was just like a aha moment for him, because there was someone who was sharing, we are not our past. Like that is a part of our identity, but that narrative is not the holistic experience or the identity of who we are and who we are in the present and in the future. And so she was kind of talking about how she always feels like she's seeing these historical narratives represented in art spaces, but it doesn't really bring visibility to the diverse identities and experiences and really the diaspora that we come from, because it's always kind of rooted in a lot of art spaces as like almost like this, the slave sort of experience. Like we were enslaved and, life after that, So there was a really aha moment for the person who was not a person of color, like, wow, I never really thought about it like that. And, I do see that trend a lot. And I definitely want to do what I can to listen and learn about what are those different experiences so we cannot be someone who's just locking into that historical narrative. I know it was like a really big moment. But yeah, these all I think are so interconnected. And I know there was in the general debrief, there was a woman who worked at the museum who was like, I really want to see how do we bring this accountability piece forward, and how do we create metrics and understanding how impactful are we being and being inclusive to different communities, and how are we measuring that, how we're doing the effectiveness of that, and taking accountability, which I think aligns with seeking people at the margins, protecting and strengthening culture, promoting excellence, and so on and so forth. So yeah, so many of these I think were highlighted in the conversations, and really I think help people have a guide, right? Like it's not going to necessarily tell you step by step exactly how it can be done, but if you just have a set of principles that you can always come back to, it helps you be able to bring this into fruition in a very tangible way. So great tool.
Two things that popped into my mind as you were speaking. One, did anybody mention the Philip Johnson space in New York? Shoot.
I don't believe so.
Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not.
New York, MoMA.
Hmm.
Yeah, so Philip Johnson, his name is in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And there's this coalition, Black Reconstruction. There was an exhibit in NOMA back in 2021. It's called Reconstructions, Architecture and Blackness in America. And they had asked the art museum to cover the name of the space, Philip Johnson, because of his views, and they refused to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So since you're not aware of that, then we're not going to talk about that.
I pulled I think the website up that it speaks more to that, but I'm definitely interested in learning more.
Yeah, because it's just like museums, right? And here's an example of a museum featuring Black space, and they choose to ignore the races in the room. So yeah. Okay. The second thing that popped up in my mind was you being in Oklahoma and the massacre that happened in the early 1900s. There is a museum being built. Are you aware of this?
Yes.
And the fact that the firm is not of color.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, and that museum has been built.
Oh, it has.
So
Sorry.
yes, no, you're
I'm
fine.
kind of late.
Yeah.
When was it
I'm
completed?
pulling up the website. I'll have to go look. I'm sorry.
Have you been there?
No, I haven't yet. I'll have to look that up, like what exactly it was. But yeah, I think that's just one of the frustrating parts of living here in Oklahoma. And I think to be fair in a way, there is not a lot of we are the only BLACKSPACE Oklahoma is a part of the BLACKSPACE National Urbanist Network. I have also started my own nonprofit planning and design firm with one of my colleagues called Open Design Collective, and we are doing formal projects here locally. We are the only firm that's Black and women led in the state of Oklahoma that's doing this work. So, and we really just formalized it last year. So, there's not a lot of local Black people necessarily here that are in that space, which again goes back to the conversation of that underrepresentation and us wanting to do what we can to bring more people into this career field and professionally. But it is interesting to kind of see this norm here where folks feel like they have to go outside of the community or outside of the state to bring people in to do projects like this. So I do think even though there are not a lot of Black architects in Oklahoma, there are tons around the country that probably could have brought in a deeper perspective, connection, could have worked to convene local people through local leaders and residents and community members and really make sure that those voices were integrate it into the process. And to be fair, I'm not super familiar with what their process looked like and how much engagement they did, but it's like, okay, there's not a lot of Black architects here, but there's tons, across the country that I think could have been offered an opportunity like this. So I think it's, problematic in so many ways. And it's definitely a trend that we're seeing here in Oklahoma. And I know all over where we're often overlooked, or because usually we're smaller, people don't think we're equipped or we have the skill set, or they don't value that cultural connection as a part of that expertise. So yeah, when I saw that news come out and I saw the firm and saw that they were not people of color, I don't even know if they have any people of color on their staff. I just was just like, okay, there's another instance where we dropped the ball and missed an opportunity.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they hired some Black people for that project. Just
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to put words in or whatever, but I had to Google it to
Mm-hmm.
see. They it looks like they were open back in 2021, so last year.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
That's what it looks like.
That sounds right. Yeah.
And I didn't even know it opened.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm questioning, like, they could have done this tour, right? They could have went to a bunch of HBCUs. They could have educate our community about the museum, your design process, about the museum, like some effort to to let the people know that, hey, this exists, come
Right.
and see it. Like, even when the African American museum here opened, it was a huge thing. People are
Right.
still talking about it. That's the thing that you come to DC to see.
Oh, for sure. You cannot leave DC without stopping by there. I was just there in August.
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
that's what you do to see. So if I'm ever in Oklahoma, in I keep sorry,
Mhm.
it's a big state. If I'm ever in, it's Greenwood, right? That's the
Tulsa.
area.
Yeah,
Tulsa.
Tulsa's the city, in the Greenwood neighborhood district area is where that museum is.
So if I'm ever in Tulsa, how am I supposed to
I know.
know that there's a museum representing Black Wall Street? Like,
Right.
how am I? So,
Yeah.
it's to me, it's this missed opportunity, and you're afraid to address the elephant in the room, right? Like, here you go. You led this project, and you're a person who designed it that doesn't represent the people that were there, and you're speaking among the people that look like that they ancestors could have been there.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that?
Right.
Someone like me would ask you that question. Do you have any Black people on your staff? Like, who the,
Mm-hmm.
like, I would ask that question, and they need to confidently answer that.
Right. I think too, people, and I'm not speaking on behalf of them necessarily, but I think people just, something I'm always hearing, even before I was in this built environment field, is this kind of response of, or we don't know anyone, or there's not any people here who can do that work. And it's like, no, you just don't have the relationships, and you don't know, you don't have the relationships with individual people, you don't have relationships with the community, so you don't even know who is here and who is not, who's qualified or not, or who could have been in that position. And that's even in the social services field, where I feel like there are so many people of color running those organizations. Frontline staff have been in those positions for decades and decades on end. I mean, I would hear that in that space, well, we want to hire more people of color in leadership, but we don't know anyone. Well, do you not know anyone, or are you just not looking hard enough? Or are you just completely disconnected from the community that you're saying you're serving, but you probably are not doing that in the ways that you could be because you don't have that representation on your leadership team. So I think here in Oklahoma, that's always kind of like the go-to response, is that we don't know anyone, or we don't know anyone who's qualified, or we've been looking and we can't find anyone, when really they just don't have the relationships or the trust built in a lot of the communities that they're trying to bring representation from on to their projects and staff.
And as a planner, it's planners that have to think in terms of, on a larger scale. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm also thinking too about the city officials who wrote this RFP. and created these guidelines, or you know the words are escaping me right now, but anyway, who wrote the RFP didn't put in there, you have to be a minority owned firm, or a stipulation where we can't have non-colored people working on
Yeah.
Black museum.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to pull that RFP and see what it said. Those are conversations we're having here in Oklahoma City as well. I'm actually working on a project here in Northeast OKC, in a neighborhood area that was really, again, impacted by urban renewal. In urban renewal, the authority still owns land from that time frame, from the 60s throughout the late 70s. They still own vacant land in this community, and they want to release those properties in a way that supports the equitable redevelopment of the community. And that's a big conversation we're having, is how are the RFPs written in a way that is inclusive and is accessible to people who are wanting to be developers or wanting to be property owners who live in this community? Because there are folks in this area. There's actually a whole initiative going on right now to train emerging Black developers in Northeast OKC specifically. And so as we're looking at this RFP, how do we make sure that we're using language and putting in criteria that helps make that possible, instead of being a barrier or screening people out who maybe don't check all the boxes, but can do the work and are from the community and should be positioned to do the work and own property in this area again. So the RFP is critical, and people have to really look at that and see how it's being a barrier or being an opportunity for people who have been harmed by those in those neighborhoods.
What's next for BLACKSPACE OKC?
Actually, we're having a brunch this weekend. I wish you could come. It's going to
Oh,
be Kenyatta and Cameron, one of our new program coordinators that was hired on this year, are flying in to Oklahoma City, and we're going to be hosting a Black urbanist brunch. I'm so excited. BLACKSPACE Oklahoma, since the pandemic, it's been kind of quiet. And so we've been trying to find ways. And there's also been an influx of interested people wanting to get engaged and wanting to get involved. And so, again, just the value of this national network, they have been able to bring in a lot of capacity to help plan something really meaningful and to get people excited and to learn more about the opportunities to get involved with not only BLACKSPACE Oklahoma, but connected to the national network as well. And so the brunch is going to be kind of like our first fall event, and there's a lot of people we're going to be hosting. We picked a Black women-owned business in Northeast Oklahoma City, Black-owned food, Black-owned drinks, Black venue, Black everything. It's going to be amazing. And I'm really excited because I also work at the University of Oklahoma in the College of Architecture at a place called the Institute for Quality Communities. And we are the community engagement arm of the college and work with towns all across the state to help with their built environment projects. And so I get to work with students at OU, and we have actually, it's not where it needs to be, but we have a good amount of students of color in the college this year, more than I've ever seen. And I'm the only Black staff there. So I'm really excited to get these students who go to a PWI, who don't have a lot of representation in the classroom or in the college or even on the campus as a whole, to be able to get connected to this network and know that, hey, there's a community here for you outside of college that you can connect with, and we're here for you. We want you to succeed and be supported. So I'm really excited to bring folks. And the University of Oklahoma sits in a town called Norman, which is south of OKC, and it is not really diverse. So to get them to come up to OKC in this Black space with this Black event is going to be really fun. So yeah, that's going to be Saturday. And then we're just going to keep working and organizing, getting people signed up with the network, and keep doing these urbanist experiences and learning together and building community together. So
are you from Oklahoma? I never asked that
I
question.
am. I'm fourth generation
Wow.
Oklahoman. Yes, my family came here. My mother's side is from a town called Wewoka, Oklahoma, and we migrated here from Alabama. My great grandparents, and my dad's side is from Tulsa, actually North Tulsa. And so, yeah, I've been here my whole life, and Oklahoma really has a strong Black history. I don't know if you know this, but Oklahoma had the highest number of Black family townships, more than anyone else, any other state in the nation. We had over 50 Black towns in Oklahoma. And Oklahoma was actually moving to become a Black statehood in the early 1900s. And
Mm.
so there's still 13 Black townships in existence today, and they're all actively working to sort of think about the future. How do they bring people back? How do they retain residents? How do they bring in economic resources and really make these communities full time again? But I'm really proud to be from Oklahoma because this is a Black space. And even though so much has been lost and taken away, this is where a lot of Black people migrated to escape racialized violence and to be able to buy land and build economic stability for their families and to be able to take their kids to school in safe environments. And of course, as we know from the Tulsa race massacre, a lot of those efforts in those townships were burned and violated and destroyed in many ways. This was a place for opportunity for a lot of Black families. And so even people who live in different parts of the country, I'm like, you probably have some connections to Oklahoma because this is where Black life was thriving in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So, yeah, been here for a long time. And I'm part of a group that's working to make it better where people don't feel like they have to flee as soon as they turn 18.
Yeah. Yeah. I always like, what would have happened if we were allowed to thrive?
Right.
That could have been the Atlanta, right?
Yes.
That could have been the New York,
Right.
like
Right.
it could have been the Harlem on a
Exactly.
grander scale.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's all I have for you. Anything else you want to talk about or?
No, I think that was great. Thank you so much for having me and letting Black Space come share the work. I really, I guess I'll add, if anyone is interested in these professions or the field, like be encouraged. I came in super untraditional, did not know anything about design and architecture, but I did find my niche. And I think the value that I bring is that people-centered approach in my practice and really being sensitive and aware of how people are having to live in their communities as a result of policy and practices that we've done in this community. And so everyone brings in an important perspective. And I think if you can just kind of find your niche, you will do fine. And we need more people of color at these decision-making tables in these positions that are planning, designing, and building our cities. We need more of us. We need more diversity. We need people who, and I know so many people who I'm like, you're already a city planner. You're just not a city planner, but you are doing city planner work every day in your community. Have you ever thought about this profession? So I think Black Space is making that easier for people because you do have a community, you do have a safe place where you can share your challenges, be supported. I've been able to make so many connections and find friends in this space that otherwise being here in Oklahoma, I probably wouldn't have been able to find and be guided in a way because there are cities who are a little bit more advanced than us as it relates to this justice equity work. In Oklahoma, it really is just kind of emerging because we are in a very red political landscape and conservative landscape here. And so being able to have friends in this work, people I can rely on, people I can connect with, I think has made it easier for me as a professional. And I hope that helps other people who are thinking about it know that, hey, as a person of color, I don't have to be alone because there is a national network that I can be a part of that's going to support me. So I guess I'll just end on that.
Perfect ending. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for coming on and
Thank
talking
you.
to me. If people wanted to get in contact with you, LinkedIn is at the best way.
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best. Vanessa
Okay.
Morrison on LinkedIn.
Okay, and I will add that to the show notes as well as blackspace.org.
Yes.
Okay.
We have each cousin has a page on there with our information on there as well.
Okay. I'll make sure I link on that. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, listeners. I have an exciting announcement. I decided to launch a membership program for the show where you have a chance to support me and the show directly. I love creating the show, and it means the world to me that you all tune in to keep hearing me week after week. but it takes an immense amount of time and energy to produce. I want to keep the show going, and I want to invest in its growth. And I also want you to become a partner with me in this journey. That's why I'm excited to give you a chance to officially become a supporter of the show at glow.fm/archispolly, ARCHISPOLLY, or by clicking the link in the show notes. It's quick and easy. It takes less than 30 seconds and just takes clicking a link in the show notes and using Apple or Google Pay. You don't have to create any new logins, and you can contribute as much or as little as you like. If this show is part of your day or week and you like what I'm doing, then visit glow.fm/archispolly, all one word, and support me and the show in any way you can today.